3 minutes before Serena Vale was supposed to say, "I do," she pressed a silver tray into my hands like I was hired help and smiled right in my face. Then she whispered, "Kitchen's that way, sweetheart." I didn't argue. I didn't flinch. I just set the tray down and walked straight to the microphone with my clutch in my fist, like it weighed 100 pounds. Because inside that clutch was the paperwork that could stop her groom from signing a deal built on fraud, and if I waited for the vows to finish, it would have been too late. My name's Maya Hart. I'm a nurse, and I didn't start this story at a vineyard with string lights and champagne. I started it in a hospital billing office under fluorescent lights that make everybody look sick, including the people who are technically healthy. You know what I mean? I was sitting in that hard plastic chair with my elbows on my knees, staring at a stack of papers like they were written in another language because the number at the top didn't feel like math. It felt like a sentence. $52 for my little brother Eli's emergency surgery, and a few days of complications that turned into more tests, more monitors, more just-in-case procedures, all the things you want when it's your family, and all the things you can't afford when it's your paycheck. Eli was 17, stubborn funny, the kind of kid who still laughs at dumb memes even when he's in pain. And 3 years ago, our parents died in a freeway crash, so it's been me and him ever since. No backup, no second phone to call, just me trying to keep the lights on and keep him safe. And that morning, the billing coordinator, who honestly looked like she'd been carrying other people's panic for decades, slid the paper toward me and said, "Ms. Hart, we need a payment plan established today, or he transfers to county in the morning." Not mean, not dramatic, just tired like she'd said it 1,000 times and hated it every time. County was where care gets rationed, and nurses are angels with impossible workloads. And I knew Eli would survive there probably. But I also knew survival isn't the same as healing. And I heard myself say, real small, "Please give me an hour," like an hour could change a 5-digit number. And she looked at her screen and sighed and said, "1 hour, then I have to process it." So I walked out of that office with my throat tight and my hands shaking, making the kind of calls you make when you're desperate. Credit cards, I'd already maxed friends. I'd already leaned on a distant cousin who sent me a sad emoji and a prayer. And I kept thinking, how is this real? How does one bad week turn into a lifetime of debt? And then I did the stupidest thing. I went to get coffee, not because I wanted coffee, but because I needed something warm in my hands so I wouldn't fall apart in the hallway. I paid with quarters, grabbed the cup, turned too fast, and slammed right into a man in a suit so expensive, I swear it had its own zip code, and the coffee went everywhere, all over his crisp white shirt, my scrubs, the marble floor, this perfect splash pattern like a movie moment, except it was my life and I wanted to disappear. I started apologizing so hard I couldn't breathe. Grabbing napkins like that would reverse time. And he didn't yell, didn't cuss, didn't do that rich person sigh like I'd ruined his day. He just looked at me and said, calm as stone, "You're shaking, sit down." And my body, my stupid body, chose that moment to give up, because I sat and I cried, not cute tears, not one glowy cheekbone tear, I mean full sobbing, the kind that makes your chest hurt, and your face swell, and your dignity leave the building. He sat next to me, but not too close, like he understood space, and he waited. And something about a stranger not trying to fix me made it worse and better at the same time. When I could talk, I told him everything. Eli, the bill, the 1-hour deadline, the transfer, the parents, the fact that I'd been fine for 3 years, and suddenly I wasn't. And he listened like he was actually hearing me, not just waiting for his turn. Then he pulled out his phone and made one call, quick and low. "Elaine, I need you to handle something immediately." And when he hung up, he stood and said, "Show me billing." I blinked at him like he'd lost his mind, and I said, "No, I can't let you do that. I don't even know your name." And he finally looked right at me fully, like he was choosing to be clear, and he said, "Carter Shaw," then he added, "I'm going to help you, but I want something in return." And I swear my heart did that weird stumble where your brain is screaming danger and your body is screaming hope. And I asked, "What do you want?" expecting the worst. And he said, 3 months, 2 nights a week, business dinners, charity events, social stuff. You show up, you be yourself, boundaries in writing. I cover Eli's care and I pay you $10,000 a month. You can walk away anytime. I remember staring at him thinking, that's not a deal, that's a fairy tale. And I whispered, "Why me?" And he didn't flirt, didn't give some dramatic speech. He just said, "Because everyone around me is performing, I need one person who isn't." That should have been the moment I said no, because I'm not naive. I know rich men don't walk around hospitals handing out miracles. But then my mind flashed to Eli upstairs, and the way his eyes looked when he tried to act brave, and I realized I was already choosing between my pride and his health, and I'm sorry, but pride doesn't keep a kid alive. So I walked back into billing with Carter Shaw, like it was normal, like I did that every day, and the coordinator's face tightened until Carter placed a black card on the desk and said, "I'm covering it, all of it, process it now." And her whole posture changed, because money changes everything, in places it shouldn't. And when the payment cleared and she printed the confirmation, my knees almost buckled. Carter didn't make me thank him 100 times. He just slid the receipt into my hand and said, "Go see your brother," like that was the only thing that mattered. And I ran upstairs and told Eli he wasn't going to county, and he tried to crack a joke, but his voice broke, and he squeezed my hand and whispered, "You did it like I was a hero," and all I could think was I just signed my life into a stranger's calendar. That night, Elaine Carter's executive assistant called me at exactly 8 a.m. the next morning, her voice smooth and professional, like she could schedule the weather, and she said Ms. Hart, Mr. Shaw would like to meet to formalize the arrangement, and by formalize she meant paperwork. And when I got to Carter's office, there was a contract that looked like it came from a law firm that charges by the breath. I read it twice because I've been poor long enough to know fine print is where people hide knives. But it was clean, it was specific, and in bold it said, no obligation beyond attendance. No physical expectations, no exclusivity, just confidentiality and a time window. And when Carter asked why I'd agree to this at all, I said the truth. Because my brother is upstairs alive and I'm not going to gamble with that. And he nodded like he respected the honesty. He also said something that stuck with me, quiet, almost bitter. Most people would have turned that coffee spill into leverage. You just turned it into tears. And I didn't know what to do with that, because I wasn't trying to be pure or noble. I was just out of options. Then he took me to a boutique, picked out a dress like it was no big deal, and said, "Never arrive on time. It looks eager," and I laughed, because it was the most ridiculous advice I'd ever gotten, like survival suddenly had etiquette rules. The first event was a charity dinner at the Grand Hall Hotel, red carpet. Photographers, women in dresses that cost more than my car, men with that polished laugh. That means they're smiling, but also measuring you. And I was trying to breathe through it when I saw her Serena Vale Carter's ex-fiancé, blonde, perfect, moving through the room like she owned oxygen, and Carter leaned in and murmured, "That's Serena," like he was warning me about weather. Serena walked up, scanned me head to toe in about 2 seconds, and said, "Sweet as poison." Carter, what a surprise. "And who is this?" And before Carter could speak, I stuck my hand out and said, "Maya Hart, nice to meet you, because I've learned if you let people introduce you, they get to define you." Serena barely touched my fingers, then she said, "A nurse, how noble." Carter always did have a thing for charity cases, and I felt Carter tense beside me, but I smiled and said, "Actually, he spilled coffee on me in the hospital lobby." I figured the least he could do was take me to dinner, and a couple people nearby laughed, and Serena's smile twitched just for a second, like her script got edited without her permission. That became the pattern Serena poked. I didn't explode, I didn't beg, I just answered like a human being, and somehow that's what made her angrier. Over the next few weeks, Carter's world opened like a door I wasn't sure I deserved to walk through 2 events a week. Investor dinners, gallery openings, fundraisers, and I learned fast that high society is warfare with better lighting. Men asked what I did and seemed genuinely interested when I talked about my clinic, because some men liked the idea of real women watched me like I was a stain they couldn't scrub, and I kept telling myself 3 months, then I'm back to scrubs and night shifts and a normal life with Eli. Except normal was already gone. Then I met Graham Knox at an art fundraiser, and the temperature dropped the second he smiled at me. He was handsome, in that clean-cut way, blonde hair, expensive suit, confidence like cologne, and he said, "You're Maya, like my name tasted funny." Then he added Carter's newest headline. I said, "And you're Graham," because I'd done my research too, and his smile faltered. Just a hair. He leaned closer like he was about to offer me friendly advice and said, "I'm going to tell you something because I'm a good guy. Carter doesn't handle abandonment well. You're a prop to make Serena jealous. When he's done proving a point, he'll toss you back where he found you." My stomach tightened because he hit the fear. I already had the one that whispers, "You don't belong here, you're temporary. You're a mistake in a room full of intention." And for half a second, I wanted to run to the bathroom and breathe. But instead, I looked at him and said, "Funny, in my job, I can spot manipulation without a lab test." Then I added, "You're not warning me, you're trying to plant a story in my head." His eyes narrowed and he muttered, "You think you know him," and I shrugged. "I think you're projecting." Then I walked away before my hands started shaking. In the car later, Carter asked, "What did he say to you?" And when I told him, Carter's jaw tightened, and he said low, "He doesn't get to talk to you like that." Then he did something that surprised me more than the money ever did. He apologized, not for Graham, for the situation, for the spotlight, for the way people looked at me, and he said, "If it ever feels like too much, we leave." And I believed him more because he offered an exit, not a command. 2 days after that, Elaine handed Carter a wedding invitation like it was a grenade. Serena was marrying Graham at a vineyard outside Lake Briarwood. Cameras, donors, politicians. The kind of wedding that's basically a press release. And Elaine said, "This isn't just a wedding, it's a statement." Carter told me I didn't have to go, but his eyes said something else, something tired, like he'd spent a year watching Serena control the narrative, and he didn't want to lose again. I said yes because I was done being afraid of rooms that think they can shrink me. The twist, the real twist, didn't come from Serena. It came from Elaine, because the day before the wedding, she slid a folder across Carter's desk, filled with documents that made my skin go cold. Proof of funds, letters, with Carter's company name, invoices, vendor contracts, all tied to Graham. And Elaine said, "He's using your name to secure a deal if it closes. You take the fall." And Carter's face went blank. In that way people get when they're trying not to explode. He said, "I want proof, not suspicion." And Elaine nodded. And that's when I realized something ugly and useful. People don't watch you when they think you're nothing. So I used it. I listened at the venue during setup. I smiled when someone mistook me for staff. I carried a tray. When a coordinator shoved it into my hands. Because if you look like you belong in the background, people talk around you like you're furniture. I heard the planner say, "Not until after the ceremony." No paper trail. I heard Graham brag to a donor about closing tonight. I heard a vendor whisper about shell accounts, like he was scared of his own words, and I went home and told Eli, who was finally discharged and resting, And he looked up from his laptop and said, "So basically, they're doing business cosplay at a wedding." Then he did what smart, bored teenagers do. He investigated. He pulled the vendor addresses Elaine had flagged, and within an hour he texted me 2 our mailbox stores. One is an empty suite, one doesn't exist. So yeah. Ghosts and I laughed because it was the first time in weeks I'd laughed like a person instead of a survivor. Elaine built the trail from there. Payments routed through fake vendors' forged signatures, investors being told Carter was backing Graham, and one key detail that made everything urgent: Graham planned to sign the final papers right after the ceremony, with cameras rolling, so the lie would become official in public. And public lies are harder to unwind than private ones. Elaine arranged for security and authorities to be nearby, not inside nearby, because nobody wants cops in the aisle at a vineyard wedding, unless they absolutely have to. And Carter kept saying, "We do this clean," but I could see the old wound in him, the betrayal from Serena, and Graham wasn't just business, it was personal. It was the kind of betrayal that makes you question your own judgment. The morning of the wedding, I stared at myself in the mirror, in a dress Carter paid for, and I didn't feel like Cinderella. I felt like a woman walking into a room that wanted to eat her alive. Carter took my hand in the car and said, "Whatever happens, stay close," and I nodded. But inside, I was making a different promise to myself: I will not let them turn me into a joke. When we arrived, the vineyard was perfect in that staged way: white chairs, flowers, string lights, photographers, guests, laughing like they'd never had a problem in their life. And Serena spotted us instantly. She kissed the air near Carter's cheek like she was granting him access. Then she turned to me and said loud enough for people to hear, "Oh good, you brought her." And she smiled at a coordinator and said, "Kitchen's that way, sweetheart." And before I could even speak, the coordinator shoved a tray into my hands and snapped, "Set these near the aisle," and a few people laughed, because some people will always laugh when they think someone is being put in their place. My cheeks burned, but my hands didn't shake, not yet, because I felt something settle in me, the calm you get right before you do something irreversible. I set the tray down gently, like I wasn't angry, like I wasn't humiliated, like I belonged. Then I turned and walked straight toward the microphone at the front, where the officiant was about to start, and I could feel Carter behind me, confused, and I could feel Serena watching me like I'd just stepped off the stage she built. I put my hand on the mic, and the speakers made that little feedback squeal that makes everyone flinch, and the whole vineyard went quiet, in a way that felt unreal, like even the wind stopped to listen. I swallowed once and said, "Hi. My name is Maya Hart," and I paused because I saw faces shift, people trying to place me. The nurse, the rumored girlfriend, the charity case, the girl, they were just laughing at, and I continued. "Some of you think I'm staff. I'm not. I'm a nurse, and I didn't come here to ruin a wedding. I came here to stop a crime from becoming official." Graham laughed too loud, the fake, confident laugh, and he said, "This is insane." And Serena hissed, "Maya, stop," like she could command my voice, and I held up the folder from my clutch and said, "These documents claim Carter Shaw's company is backing Graham Knox's deal. They're fake, the signature is forged. The vendors listed are shells. The addresses are mailbox stores, and investors were told Carter is still involved." The crowd started whispering like a wave. Phones came out. People leaned in and Graham's face changed. Because the second a liar realizes the room isn't on his side, they get desperate. Elaine stepped forward from the side, calm as ice, and nodded toward security, and 2 men in suits moved in that were very clearly not wedding guests. And Graham tried to step toward me like he could intimidate me back into silence. And I swear I felt the old fear rise, the one that says, "Don't make a scene," but then I thought about Eli upstairs, in that hospital bed. About the way money decides who gets care, who gets time, Who gets dignity? And I realized I was done asking permission. Graham lunged for the papers like if he grabbed them, the truth would disappear, and security grabbed him first, and Carter stepped in front of me without thinking. And one of the suited men said loud and clear, "Ram Knox, you need to come with us," and the vineyard exploded into noise, gasps, voices, someone shouting, "Is this real?" Someone else whispering, "Oh my God." And Serena stood there trembling in her dress, like the world had tilted. She looked at me like I'd stolen something from her, like I'd taken her crown, and she snapped, "You're humiliating me," and I turned to her and said low enough that only the closest people heard Serena, "I'm stopping him," and her eyes flashed, because she didn't want him stopped. She wanted her day, she wanted her story, even if it was built on a lie. Graham tried to talk, tried to spin, tried to say. Carter knew, tried to drag Carter into the mud with him, and Carter finally cut him off with a voice I'd never heard from him, sharp and controlled. "Don't say my name like you own it." And that was the moment I saw something break clean inside Carter, like he'd finally stopped carrying shame that wasn't his. Security walked Graham away, still protesting, and the officiant stood frozen like someone had unplugged him, and guests backed away from Serena like scandal is contagious. I lowered the mic, my heart hammering, and I walked back to Carter, expecting honestly. I expected anger, because I hadn't warned him I'd go to the microphone, and when you've been betrayed, surprises feel like threats. Carter stared at me and asked, "Did you plan this without telling me?" And my stomach dropped, because his voice wasn't cruel, it was scared, and I took a breath and said, "I did it." So he couldn't sign after the vows. If we waited, it was done, and Elaine stepped in and said, "If she hadn't done it now, the papers would have been signed tonight." And Carter looked at me for a long second, like he was measuring whether he could trust the chaos I brought. Then he exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a year and said, "You protected me," and my eyes burned because nobody ever says that to me, not like that, not like I mattered beyond what I could endure. The wedding didn't end, it collapsed. And here's the part people don't like to talk about. The next day, the headlines didn't say, "Fraud stopped." They said, "Wedding ruined," and I became the villain in strangers' mouths, because it's easier to blame the woman holding the microphone than the man holding the scam. Serena's friends posted clips of me walking up like I was some attention-hungry disaster. Graham's people called it a misunderstanding, and even some of my own co-workers asked, "Couldn't you have done it privately?" And I wanted to scream privately, is where powerful people bury things privately, is where the truth gets negotiated into silence. I'm not saying I'm proud of turning a wedding into a crime scene. I'm saying I'm proud I didn't let fear make me quiet, because fear has been running my life since the day I signed those hospital forms for my brother. So tell me what you think honestly, because I know people are going to split on this. Was I right to expose it publicly at the wedding in front of everyone, knowing it would humiliate Serena too, or did I cross a line even if the evidence was real and the timing mattered? If you've ever been underestimated, labeled, dismissed, treated like you belong in the kitchen, when you were actually the one holding the truth. I want to hear your story too. Drop it in the comments. Argue with each other respectfully. Tell me where you draw the line between justice and spectacle, and if you think public shame is ever justified when it stops public deception. And if you've got a friend who's been treated like background noise in their own life, share this with them, hit like, subscribe, and let's talk about the kind of world we're building when we decide who deserves dignity based on what they wear.